month ago, I started progress on my indie game. It's always been my dream to create and publish a video game, and every day I get a little closer to making that goal. Over the past several months, I worked on my game development skills until I was confident enough to start on a larger project. And now, here I am, working on the desert-themed, Zelda-inspired, sort of roguelike boss fighting game. Or at least, that's the plan. I'm still in the early alpha stages. High school recently started up again for me, and life is a balance between schoolwork, sports, music, and game development. And now, college applications are a thing too. After a month of early mornings, late nights, and lunch breaks, programming in C#, animating in Blender, creating some 2D art in GIMP, and learning more about the Unity 3D game engine, I've made a lot of progress that I'm excited to show everyone. I started off by doing a total camera rework. Before, the camera had no collision detection, so it could clip through walls and the ground. The angles that the camera could turn were so limited that the player couldn't even look up. When moving the camera around, it got blurry and sometimes even clipped through the player. So I did the only sensible thing and threw that script in the trash. Now the camera works in a fundamentally different way. First, it detects mouse movement. It smoothly lerps those values, or uses linear interpolation, to make a smooth camera experience. Then, with the smoothed out camera input, it sends a physics raycast out to detect if there's anything in the way of the camera. If it detects anything, the camera goes to the point of impact to avoid clipping through walls. Otherwise, it stays a certain distance away. Thanks to this, the camera no longer clips through the ground, wall, or player, and it can move smoothly while still feeling responsive. Next up, I destroyed some bugs. Specifically, I fixed a really tiny bug, where the player would always move either their full speed or not at all, and nothing in between. This was due to using a normalized vector to make sure that the character doesn't move faster going diagonally. However, the normalized function always clamps the magnitude of the vector to 1, which results in jerky movement, since there's nothing in between 0 and 1. So I used the clamp magnitude function instead, and everything between it will now work. I improved some of the older animations as well to make the running seem more natural and prevented the sword animations from letting the arms clip through the torso, because that looks hecking painful. Now that I've fixed some bugs, I'm ready to add some new features. The main focus of this update is to improve the combat system and make it easier and more fun to attack enemies. So I added a targeting system to the game. When the targeting button is pressed, the game searches for nearby enemies and chooses the closest one. Then, the camera faces the object to help the player attack better. I created an animation for targeting where the character tenses up as if ready for a fight. In order to make the targeting system feel better, I added another system: strafing. Now when the player is targeting, they can move left, right, forward, and backwards while still facing their target. Normally the player faces wherever they're moving, but now with the targeting and strafing functionality, there's much greater freedom of movement for the player to fight and dodge. Also, while most movement is dependent on the camera, when strafing, the player moves relative to their target instead. They actually go in a perfect circle around their target, which will really help in the future when dodging and archery are implemented. Speaking of dodging, I added another feature: rolling. The player can now roll for a short burst of speed, for dodging attacks or to gain just a little bit more distance. In a game that's going to be focusing heavily on combat and boss battles, dodging is a much needed ability. The player can roll left, right, or center, and the rolling works differently depending on if the player is targeting or not. When not targeting, the player will always roll forward in the direction of their movement. However, when strafing, the player can roll to the left and right around the target, or roll straight towards the target as if to rush with an attack. The animations took a little bit of work trying to smoothly rotate around 360 degrees for an animation and return to the starting pose, but after some time working with quaternions, I eventually figured it out. It feels so cool to roll back and forth in the game, and it's going to open up the way for some pro gamer moves. Before I got too far into scripting, I realized I had a massive monolith of code. It had hundreds and hundreds of lines of code that all dealt with separate things: input, physics, movement, game logic, animation, all of it. I wanted to add a health system to the game, but I realized I couldn't keep doing it the same way if I wanted a universal health script. If every single enemy I created had a completely separate script for health, then the game would eventually become a mess of spaghetti. So I had to destroy the spaghetti code and decided to change my workflow for coding. Instead of creating giant blocks of code for each individual object in the game, I'm now going to use a component-based system, where each script is used for one purpose and most are generic so that they can be used on multiple different objects. I sliced up my original code for the character into several different scripts: basic physics, animation, input, and game logic. The game logic for the character is still a unique script, as well as the animation script, but now I have greater flexibility for the character, as the generic code such as input and physics can be swapped out or applied to other objects. For example, if I wanted the character to be controlled during a cutscene, I would temporarily replace the input script with a cut screen input script. Or if I wanted the character to possess an enemy, a la Mario Odyssey, I could disable the input script on the player character and change that to the input on the enemy. So after destroying the spaghetti code mess I made, the way forward was a lot clearer and a lot easier. Now I can just create generic code for all future enemies and can mix and match code as I need for each individual enemy. With the workflow of my game redesigned, I started on a health and damage system. This was surprisingly easy. I created a health script which stores a maximum health number and a current health number, and makes sure that the health cannot be negative or above the max health. Each object that has health, including the player, will use the same health script. Then, I made a damage script, which stores a value for a certain amount of damage. If an object has a damage script and hits another object, it checks to see if the other has a health script, and if so, it subtracts that number from the other object's health. It's working great, but there's no way to actually see how much health they have right now, other than using debug.log. That's only a temporary solution, and I need a visual way to see how much health each enemy has, and how much health the player has. And of course, what better way than to use a health bar? I'm not much of a 2D artist, but the user interface is normally always 2D, so I decided to try my best and make a health bar. I created each texture in GIMP to be stretched and applied in Unity later. I wanted it to resemble sand, so I just grabbed some Perlin noise and threw it in and bam, it's sand. My first try was kind of disgusting and I hate everything about it. Maybe it's the heart, I don't know, it's just not right. My second try went a lot better. Even though hardly anything changed, it just feels right. There's a visual effect for health bars where the bar in front moves faster than the bar behind it, showing how much health was lost in the previous hit. This lad named KaleChipsDev used it really well in the game he's developing. Just look at that. And look at it again. So of course, I want to steal that idea, and so I went on the Discord and said, "Hey man, how'd you do that?" And he was like, "You just lerp the width of the two different bars at different speeds." And I was like, "Wow! Thanks man, here's my rendition of it." Now I have the player's health bar working, but I need a way for each enemy to have a health bar in the world space. The player's one is on a screen space UI, but I want enemies to have theirs in a world space UI. So I edited the health script so that if a checkbox is checked, then the game will create a health bar in world space for them, and have the health script properly attached to it. The player doesn't need to have a health bar created for them since they already have one, so I can just uncheck that box for him. So now each enemy will start with a health bar. I also scripted the health bar to disappear if it's not visible, which will help prevent lag and speed up the game performance, because having too many health bars on screen at once can really slow down the game. Although, my game is currently running at over 400 FPS, so I don't think there's a whole lot to worry about. I wanted to make a bow next, but that's for the future. I made a lot of progress this month, and that's what matters. I've thought a lot about the future of this game, and I'm thinking it could be a mutation of the roguelike genre. My idea is to have multiple levels where each one gives you a choice between a different boss, and a different rewardable item for completing it. For example, you have a choice between Boss A and Boss B. Boss A is slightly easier, and the reward will be, let's say, a weak upgrade to your sword attack strength. Boss B is harder, and the reward will be a boost to movement speed. This idea opens up a whole new dimension of gameplay, and I am excited to start dreaming up some new items, enemies, and bosses. Thanks for watching. Remember, life's a game. Have fun with it.